Please just let me catch my breath. I am the stranger.
So hello, I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this special Sunday, October 27th broadcast. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We don't do prayers and we don't do buffalo speeches. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity. And we do step on a few toes along the way sometimes. But that's not our intention. Our intention is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We'll take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that is heaped upon us. And we do it all right here from the Cattaraugus territory of Seneca Nation live. So let's talk Native. But first, let me remind folks that our audio streams at www.letstalknative.com. And we stream live video of the show on our Facebook group pages and share them on a bunch of pages via Facebook Live. Our shows are available as podcasts after our broadcast, and we take the video and post it up on our YouTube channel, usually up the next day. So you can check it out. You can share it. Sometimes watching on YouTube is a little easier because sometimes Facebook isn't always received in some places that well. So we do stream live on Facebook, but we also put the video up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. I encourage people to subscribe to our podcast and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you'll catch all our videos, including this one. I am the host and producer of the show, and I'm joined in studio by Jake Proud, who is managing our audio and our video. And let's get to it. It is that time of year. The football season is well underway. We are heading into Halloween. We're going to be into November, our special month. And I say special month because most presidents, and we'll see if this moron does it, but most presidents declare November as Native American Heritage Month. And then they give us our special day, which is also Black Friday. They designate the Friday after Thanksgiving, not Thanksgiving. That's too busy celebrating pilgrims. But the Friday after Thanksgiving, they dedicate towards Native American Heritage Day, I guess. So the light should be on us, right? But at the same time, we also have mockery of Native people is full underway. And in fact, next Sunday, the Washington NFL franchise will be in Seneca territory. They'll be here in Western New York, playing at a Buffalo Bills home game. Now, I will say, when Washington went up to Minnesota and got their butts kicked last week, which they pretty much get their butts kicked every week, I think they have one win against one of the worst teams in the NFL, and that's and they almost lost that game. But look, I'm not going to hear and talk this. I'm not going to talk about football. The whole football thing after Colin Kaepernick and people getting their heads busted up and all that other stuff is not exactly something high priority for me to talk about. But the name, the Washington football name, I do have to talk about that because it isn't just Washington, the U.S. capital, that uses a racial slur for the name of its sports franchise. There are still many, not so many colleges, but many high schools and other teams, in fact, other sports that use Native mascots. And, there's still many high schools still using the slur that Washington uses for the name. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And to really talk about it, you've got to address a bunch of things all at once. And the first thing that has to be addressed is these polls that get done. There's always this effort to try to suggest that, Native people, yeah, they're all right with the name. Yeah, there's a few loudmouth Native people who really don't have anything better to do, so they're making noise, and they're trying to or what do they call it? Political correctness gone amok or run amok or some stupid thing like that. And so they'll cite these polls where they'll say, and it used to be they were saying like at one time they were saying 90% of Native people polled are okay with it. Then they and they have another poll so it was 80, and now I think they're saying like 67% of Native people polled. Let's be clear about these polls. Well, look, in fact, let's not even talk about the polls first. Let's talk about who is considered Native before the phone rings. I will say right here, and maybe I don't know if anybody has ever done this before, but I think it is fair to say that there are more people in the United States who are not native, who claim to be native, than actual native people. Let me say it again. I think there are more people claiming, and this isn't picking on Elizabeth Warren necessarily alone, but there are more people, non-native people, and I'm not just talking white people either. There are more non-native people claiming to be, especially Cherokee, claiming to be native than actual natives. And of course, if you look at when you see public, well, how many native people are there in the United States? And, the estimates can range from 0.7% to like 2%. That's a pretty big range. Now, so why is it? Why can't they come up with an accurate number? Well, part of the reason is all these people who just self-proclaim. They just say, "Oh yeah, I'm native," and nobody. And so that's all you have to do on a census. For instance, when you do the U.S. Census every 10 years, they do that. All you have to do is say, "Oh yeah, check Native American," and now they're going to log you in as they're figuring out the demographics of the United States. Oh yeah, this person said they're native. Now they aren't saying, "Well, how many people does the Bureau of Indian Affairs?" And I'm not saying that this is the greatest test either, but what is it? What I say it was 468. I don't even remember the number. I've quoted it here, but federally recognized tribes. The federal government has a specific list of so-called tribes that they recognize as, well, they recognize as tribes, bands, or nation of Indians subordinate to the laws of the United States. They know how many numbers there are in each one of those. So they know that number. Now, I'm not saying that number is complete. There are more Native people than that, because there are a whole lot of Native people who are not, quote unquote, federally recognized. Did I say 4? Yeah, I'm sorry. 573. Yeah, where did I get 4 from? I knew it was in 500s. Yeah, 573. I remember when it was 565, and maybe that threw me up. But 573, quote unquote, federally recognized tribes in the United States. That's not where these calls are made to, by the way, to any of these. They don't say, well, give me the list of those 573 federally recognized tribes, and we'll call the tribal offices and we'll poll them. No, they don't do that. They just poll, and then they'll ask, well, are you Native American? And they say, oh yeah, I'm Native American. Okay, go, good. Now, how do you feel about this? So they come up with these polls. Again, self-identified, just people on a phone. And most of it are landlines. And I got to tell you, native territories aren't big on landlines. We don't have a whole lot of infrastructure on our territories. Look, when cell phones and smartphones came out, we finally had access to information, and internet that we never had before. I mean, even here as I do the show, this is how I do my internet on a jetpack, a little MiFi device, because we don't have decent enough internet. We don't have infrastructure. We don't forget about how our phone lines are terrible. The electric service on our territories are terrible. Every time the wind blows, we have the power go out. So when Annenberg or anybody else is going to do these polls, they just call these numbers and they say, well, they'll call a whole bunch of numbers, and then they'll categorize all the ones who said, oh yeah, I'm 1.5 30 seconds Cherokee, and oh yeah, you're Native American, we're going to put you down. Now, and so then when they go up with these numbers, the polls are flawed. And then let's talk about how the questions are asked. I mean, if you say, do you find the name of the Washington football team offensive? All right, that's one way to frame the question. But if you said, do you find it offensive for sports teams to use Native people as mascots? Well, that's a little different question, but that's not the way it's asked. Do you find it offensive that a stadium full of sports fans are wearing red face or headdresses or makeup and are dressing up as Native people? They don't ask that question. They ask, do you find it offensive that your culture is being mocked or reenacted by cheerleaders or whatever else? No, they don't ask those. They ask just a very benign question, which frankly doesn't really cut to the issue. So anytime you hear somebody say there's a poll that is that where Native people, overwhelmingly, or even just the majority, the simple majority of Native people polled, are okay with the Washington football team's name. It's just not true. Every Native organization, every federally recognized tribe, and I don't know any Native peoples whose representatives have come out speaking on behalf of their people. Now, there are a few Native people. I mean, there are Native people who are Washington fans. You know what? There are Native people who are Trump fans. Ironically, they're probably the same people. So so just to be clear here. But no, there are Native people who are genuinely, Washington football fans, or Cleveland baseball fans, or Atlanta baseball fans. But they are not the vast majority. And if you ask those 573 federally recognized tribes, or the several hundred state recognized or non-federally recognized tribes, if you ask them, and I hate to use the word tribes, but I'm trying to make a point here. If you ask them, so what is the position of your people? Not what is your opinion as a sports fan, but what is the position of your people when it comes to this mascot issue? None of them have come out in support of the Washington football team's name. None of them. And if some have, I want to know, because I need to start a letter writing campaign. It just doesn't exist. In any of these polls, whether it's a newspaper or whether it's a television network, cable television network, or Annenberg or anybody else, they don't poll all of the Native organizations, and not just the individual Native peoples, but even the groups like NCAI or USET or any of the other organizations that exist. They don't ask them. Why? Because the answer is overwhelmingly, almost unanimously, against a team using our name and our image, or a racial slur that references us. Now, and again, I hate to have to go through this over and over again, but it is very clear that the word redskin has a connection to the bounties paid for the scalps taken from Native people. And scalps have been taken from Native people from the Spanish, from the Dutch, from the English, from the French, and from Americans. And in fact, they were being taken from, Americans were still offering bounties for scalps on the West Coast in the 19th century, the late 19th century. This whole idea of, and again, I saw a news article, and then my friend Bob Del Monte referred to this quote again, using this thing about whether Trump has gone off the reservation. That phrase is essentially a license to kill. Now, again, you don't know that, right? What do you mean off the reservation means a license to kill? When Native people were being forced, almost in prison camp style, onto quote unquote reservations, if they left the reservation, they were considered hostiles and they could be killed. They could legally be hunted down and killed. And, and in some cases, there were bounties for those kills. Not only could you kill them, you'd actually get paid to kill them. And, if you could either deliver the body, or you could just rip out, cut the top of the heads off. So that's where the expression off the reservation comes from. Because the good Indians stayed put. The bad, the wild, the free Native people went off the reservation, and that means that you are out of control, out of government control. So when they say to a white person, he's gone off the reservation, it means that they're out of control. Doesn't mean that you can kill them, but it means that they're out of control. So I think it's really important that people understand where some of this phraseology comes from. And of course, all of the misnomers. I mean, again, the word Indian, it doesn't come from Indios. I know Russell Means and other people, said, oh yeah, it meant, people of God or something like that, or, of God. No, that's not, it wasn't Indios or Endios. Even as they were saying in Spanish, it was Indio. And it was because Columbus thought he'd reach the Indies. Now, anybody who says, well, but they didn't call India back then. Well, they They called the river the Indus River. They called that, and the land on the other side of the Indus River, including the islands off the coast of Asia, they were called the Indies. Columbus specifically wrote about reaching the Indies in his journal. So that's why the native people were called Indians, and it's wrong. So there's that. So any school, the school that I went to high school in, are still called, and it pains me because I still have some friends on my friends list that post up the scores of their alma mater, and they're forever saying, "Oh, the Indians this, the Indians that." No, there aren't any. So there's the misnomers, and of course, then there's the slur, like the one the Washington football team used, and others. I mean, savages, Red Raiders. I mean, the whole idea of always making us this violent people, because I guess violence and sports go together, not just with football. Braves, Warriors. Sometimes the Kansas City, the Chiefs. Like, that's all we were, right? And of course, they ignore the fact that half our population were women. You never see, Native women used as mascots. Although you'll hear, derogatory words like squaw used, to describe the cheerleaders. Look, it's all wrong, and it's all bad. And the most ironic part about the whole mascot thing is that every time I hear white people say, "Yeah, but it's our tradition. We've been calling ourselves the Redskins, for 60 years, for 70 years, 80 years. We picked that name back at the turn of the 20th century or whatever else." You'll hear all of this BS. Well, let me put some things in perspective. Now, if you've listened to the show, you've heard me talk about this in the past. But let me put this into perspective. While white kids were being encouraged to play Indian in their schools because because they adopted some name that referenced either a native people or some reference to native people anyway, whether it's a misnomer or not, or a slur. While white kids were being encouraged to do that, native kids from the mid 19th century, even during the most violent hostilities that were occurring for native people, from the mid 19th century to the like 3/4 of the way through the 20th century, native kids oftentimes were being ripped from their homes and sent to these residential schools, or otherwise known as boarding schools, in the U.S. and Canada. And there they were punished for trying to hang on to any semblance of their culture. So white kids could not only play Indian, they were encouraged it by their tax-funded schools to do so. Colleges were doing it. Pro teams were doing it. Elementary schools were doing this. And of course, Hollywood, and it was a mockery all the way around. So while everybody else could play dress up and play cowboys and Indians, it was associated with their schools. Their cheerleaders could dress up as little squaws, or Pocahontases, or whatever they want to call them. While all that's going on, native kids are being beaten for speaking their language. They're being beaten for trying to hang on to, anything that would identify them as native. Why? Because the policy of the United States and Canada, and frankly, this would spread, into New Zealand, Australia, all these places that had indigenous people. The policy was kill the Indian, save the man. With emphasis, and I got to tell you, with emphasis on kill the Indian. Why? Because, and why do I say it? Because many children died in these schools. They died trying to preserve their identity. Today is the anniversary of the death of one of those kids. It was a 12-year-old boy by the name of Charlie, but he went by Cheney Wenjack. 1966. Now, we're not talking about the 19th century. 1966. This 12-year-old boy escaped from a residential school in Ontario and attempted to walk home. On this day, in 1966, is when he finally succumbed to the elements. Now, keep in mind, it may not seem, maybe it's 50 degrees right now in the northern part of Ontario. Temperatures were getting well below freezing, this late in October. So, Cheney Wenjack, 12-year-old boy, trying to make it home 600 kilometers. What's 600 kilometers? How many miles is that? Yeah, 600 kilometers is where, away from home, is where he was ripped out of his home and sent to his residential school. And he was trying to make it back. Most of the way, he 372 miles, almost 400 miles away from home. And he tries to walk home and dies on this day in 1966. 12-year-old boy, 1966. So, I'm sorry, that's not that long ago. I was almost 7 years old then. So that's my lifetime. That's not my grandparents. So this kid would have only been a few years older than me. He was 12. I would have been almost 7. 12-year-old boy died trying to get home, trying to go home from a residential school where they're trying to strip it away, kill the Indian, save the man. While white kids get to play Indian all day. They get to compete in sports, playing Indian. I meant, we opened up the show with a song called "The Stranger" from Gord Downie from Tragically Hip. He was a front man from Tragically Hip. He did a project after, and Gord Downie's passed away now. He was diagnosed with cancer and then embarked on a project to tell Cheney Wenjack's story, and that they did a graphic novel. He released an album called The Secret Path, and then produced an animated film. And you can go on YouTube and you can watch the whole film. You don't have to you don't have to pay for it. I encourage you to watch Gord Downie's Secret Path. By all means, listen to the music, but check out the. I've screened this film in New York, but Gord Downie said this was his biggest project. He said this was his best work. Now, if you're a Tragically Hip fan, or if you are familiar, or if you want to become familiar, by all means, check out the music of Tragically Hip, a hugely successful band in Canada, and had a great success in the United States as well. But Gord Downie dedicated his final big project to trying to tell the story of Cheney Wenjack. Met his sisters, went out and traveled. And in fact, if you watch the film, they cover some of that. It's heartbreaking. I mean, look, when this is just one of those children. Many children died right in the schools because of abuse, including physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, verbal abuse, malnutrition, just pathetic healthcare. And in fact, things like when tuberculosis was running rampant, the mortality rate in some of these schools, especially in the Canadian side, was over 50%. I mean, it was written about in the papers. And of course, we refer to this as genocide because it is by definition genocide. The idea of ripping kids away, the idea of trying to eliminate a people by killing their culture. Now, having said that, any of those morons out there who say, "Oh, well, that's why we do the mascot thing. We're keeping the culture alive." No, you're not. There's no making a mockery of somebody's culture isn't keeping the culture alive. It actually kills it even more. Kills it by 1,000 cuts. Death by 1,000 cuts. Isn't that what they say? Yeah, death by 1,000 cuts. 50,000 people in a stadium wearing war paint and chicken feathers, doing tomahawk chops or whatever the hell else they're doing, is not keeping a people or a people's culture alive. That has nothing to do with who we are living on a native territory. It has nothing to do with the struggles that we go. And look, fighting the mascot issue, that may not seem like a big deal to many people. Hey, don't you guys have bigger problems? Don't you have a high suicide rate? Yeah, you know what? The idea of making a mockery of us publicly every freaking weekend in 4 sports a year, and especially coming into this time of year, it contributes to that. That whole identity issue that I talk about so much on this show, it is tied directly to our identity being mocked every freaking day. There are studies, look, psychiatrists, the industry has studied this and have been, unflinchingly clear about the damage that it does, not just to Native people either. The damage that it does to the non-Native public and to the non-Native kids, because this actually, it encourages prejudice and bullying and all kinds of stuff, and not just bullying of kids. I mean, look, for any of us, my good friend, Ann and my good friend Donna, and I know you guys are listening to this show at some point. You guys experience this firsthand with the bullying that you guys receive from parents of the schools like Neshaminy and others that you guys are trying to stand up to. Look, when we were fighting Lancaster, and not even fighting, when I was asked by Lancaster to help educate them, we were physically threatened all the time, sometimes by kids. Some kid who thinks he's, some macho athlete at 18 years old wanted to try to, he thought he was going to beat me up. I mean, come on. I'm a grown man. I'm not some kid just, still smelling like pee from high school, for crying out loud. So, I mean, again, the absurdity of that is, can't be missed. But the parents, I mean, some of these, ex cheerleaders, who are still trying to live their glory days, threatening some of our women. I mean, it was absurd. So, no, bullying isn't just about kids. And in fact, abuse is a learned behavior. Why do kids bully? Ann just posted this earlier today, or yesterday. Why do kids bully? Because adults bully. That's why. And not just adults in white hoods either. There's a ton of them at football games every weekend. We're at the bottom of the hour. We'll take a break here and we'll come back. Look, I got to pound on this some more. I got more here, and we got to talk about it. So we'll do that when we come back. This is John Kane, and this is Let's Talk Native.
knows how to live. We won't be idle anymore.
All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. I want to thank our sponsors who enabled me to do this and bring these conversations to you, twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week when we've got a show in New York, which I'm not sure what's happening there. We'll talk about that on another show. But I want to thank our sponsors, and those include Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, my good friends at Grand River Enterprises and Native Wholesale Supply, and a few others who help us in times of need. They drop a check in the mail. They sometimes help out with transportation, perhaps, or a room here and there. So I want to thank all of you who pitch in to enable us to do this. Look, we don't have grants from philanthropic organizations. We don't have. We aren't supported by the Seneca Nation or any large institution. Look, we're supported by a few businesses, some larger, some smaller, but a handful of people help us do what we do here. So I want to thank them. But I also want to thank all of you who share the show. My wife in particular, who shares this show on a bunch of Facebook group pages while we're Facebook live streaming. But those of you who share the podcast and who have subscribed to our podcast, those of you who subscribe to our YouTube channel and share our YouTube videos, not just the videos of our show, but we cracked 2,200 views on our Columbus in his own words video that we did. So we're starting to we're starting to get out there. Look, we're not doing a million squirrel videos, but nor will we. But we continue to try to provide not just the talking points, but provide a concise argument on that we can make when we're engaged in these conversations, including what we're doing here with this mascot issue. I mean, it's for anybody who says, "Well, it's we're trying to honor you." No, you're not. I mean, the reason for people to pick a native mascot, it goes back to some of L. Frank Baum's comments about how it would be better to eliminate us as a people, so the glory of our past could be celebrated later on. And that's what they're doing. That's what these schools are doing. They're trying to claim our history as their characteristics. And they're only cherry picking characteristics. Look, they aren't talking about diplomacy or any of the other things that we as Native people had developed in my estimation in a much more superior way than white people. White people were all about war, and they still are. I mean, they're still killing people all over the freaking planet. And the United States is as guilty as anybody. The United States has probably killed more people. Look, I remember seeing this big billboard in New York, and it talked about how many people died by communism. And they talk about, Russia, which are white people, by the way, China, all these places where and they never put on there how many people American democracy killed, not just native populations, but how many people were killed with a dropping of atomic bombs or any other massive bombing campaign. How many people died because of the United States? No, they don't talk about that. But, I think it's really important that people understand when people try to make a mockery of us and try to rob and rewrite history, or just ignore history and just create this either myth or cartoon or Disney tales of who we are, whether it's what Disney did with Pocahontas. Look, I've showed video of there was a film called Real Engines, REEL Engines, and it talks about how Hollywood and did all these things to to cast us a certain way. I got a Bugs Bunny clip in on that video, shooting through a fort, and literally saying 1 little, 2 little, 3 little, and marking his kills on a wall. Then he says, "Oh, wait a minute, that was a half breed," and wipes out half of the mark he put on the wall. And that's comedy. That's for kids, right? That's the Oscar-winning rabbit. I mean, this is what we have experienced. So, the question has to come down. Look, there was a big controversy up on the Canadian side and a controversy in Virginia here on the U.S. side over politicians wearing blackface. I mean, it's a public outrage. And these guys have to grovel to the public saying, yeah, I was wrong. I was sorry. I didn't know any better. I was young. I was stupid. I was this and everything else. So whether Justin Trudeau or he was lieutenant governor, I think it was the governor of Virginia? I don't remember. A couple of politicians in Virginia who also their yearbooks had them in blackface. And it's a huge public outcry. And it isn't even just black people. I mean, they certainly, make noise, justifiably so, by the way. But white people get, oh man, how this person wore blackface. But red face is okay? 20,000, 30,000 people wearing red face in a football stadium or a baseball stadium? Do you ever see these morons at a Cleveland game? I mean, complete red face. In fact, they'll put even makeup to put the triangle eyes like their Chief Wahoo mascot. Even when they've gotten rid of some of these mascots, like at the University of Illinois, they still allow this moron to come in there dressed in native regalia. This white guy dressed in native regalia, paint on his face, blocking, making a mockery of our culture. They still won't throw him out. So blackface is bad, but red face is good. I mean, there's no you can't. There's no way to not make a comparison here. We know that blackface is wrong, but we don't know that red face is wrong, and not just red face, but the whole mockery, the feathers, including the Pocahontas costumes that are always a big hot number this time of year as we head into Halloween. The brave and the Indian princess, all of the crap. We are not a costume. We are not a mascot. We are not your plaything. You can dress up and you can do whatever you want. There's a whole lot of characters that you can dress up as. Look, the question. So if you want to go as Tupac and you're white, if you want to dress up as Tupac, can you put blackface on? No, you can't. And if you're white, you probably shouldn't try to go as Tupac. You want to put a bandana on, fine. Or if you're white, don't try to be a Rastafarian. Don't do it. There's plenty of white characters you can play. You can dress as a jackass. You probably look like a jackass anyway. You might as well dress up as a jackass. Look, this isn't complicated, folks. This is pretty easy. And don't for a second suggest, oh, I wanted to dress as a Cherokee princess because I want to honor you. Bullshit. I mean, look, you don't. And any school that says we're trying to honor, no, you're not. You're trying to appropriate some characteristic that you believe that we once had that you sure don't recognize that we have now. You're not honoring us. You're trying to grab some characteristic of our history that you think was our history and claim it for yourselves. Look, you're calling yourselves Redskins, Indians, Braves, Warriors, Savages, Red Raiders. You're calling yourselves that. And then you'll put pride after it. I mean, don't pretend for a second that you're trying to honor us. And I'll tell you what else. If you find some token Native person or someone who claims to be, including one of this stupid organization that calls themselves Guardians or some stupid name like that, who think the only way to preserve and to keep Native people relevant is to keep using us as mascots. Is there anything more absurd or stupid or ignorant than that? To say that the only place that we have in American society to keep us relevant is when people make a mockery of us. Most of the people, Native people, who still support this practice, well, first off, most people who claim to be Native aren't. That are doing it. Most of them aren't. Flat out, they're frauds, and that's proven out every time. But the few that are, these people have had their identity so stripped away from them that they think the only way that they can be relevant is if white people make a mockery of us. I mean, how pathetic is that? And like I said, there are Native people who support this. A woman out there, she fought like hell. She wanted the University of North Dakota to keep the name Fighting Sioux. Of course, they didn't. And the Lakota fought against it. Not this one woman, Eunice or whatever the hell her name was. I don't know. But she is not, the voice of her people. She's one person who got famous by standing up against what everybody else believed. Parading a couple of old, and I'll say feeble, and I don't mean it to be insulting, but old men who were Navajo code talkers, wrapping them up in Washington Redskins jackets and ball caps, flying them to a game in Washington, D.C., and then parading them out on the field. Look, that's deplorable. I mean, that's not honoring people. I mean, and especially if you're going to wrap them up in all of your merchandise. I mean, that is just deplorable. I mean, that's disgusting. So let's call it what it is, because it is. It is outrageous. But here, having said all that, they're going away. I mean, every year, more and more schools drop their Native mascot names, not just the worst one, the R word. Not just that one. Their schools are dropping them every single year. Some states, Maine, California, some states have completely banned the use of schools for schools to use Native mascots. So I mean, they're going away. The Washington football team, they are not going to. They will change the name. I don't care what Dan Snyder says. The Jewish guy who thinks that somehow he's arrived as a rich billionaire, so he can tell people what is right and what's wrong. You would think that somebody who is supposed to represent a culture that claims to have been so oppressed, and look, not just claims, they have. They aren't now. Look, I'm not saying some lunatic doesn't shoot up a synagogue, and I know that the anniversary of that was just yesterday out in Pittsburgh. I was in Pittsburgh yesterday and today. I'm not saying that stuff doesn't happen. But for the most part, Jewish people are doing quite well for themselves, while people of color are still persecuted at levels that most people can't imagine. It's hard to believe. Honestly, it's hard to believe. But you know what? We're fighting back, and we keep fighting back. And one of the areas that we are having some success is getting rid of these mascots. Look, the Cleveland baseball team, yeah, they're still calling themselves the Indians, but they've pretty much done away with their ridiculous, mascot or whatever you want to call that logo thing. Their Chief Wahoo. No, I mean they're most of these, even pro teams have gotten away. The Golden State is no longer Warriors in the native sense of the word. I mean, it's gone away. And schools, like I said, schools are doing away. So we're winning the war. But in some battlegrounds like Neshaminy and others that keep pushing back and keep fighting it, and they have to fight the whole state of Pennsylvania now because they're in such violation of just basic human rights issues. And to be clear, Anybody says, well, we should just have a referendum, we should vote. Look, social justice issues should not be decided in the same way that a prom queen is selected. I mean, the majority can be wrong and has been wrong. History has shown it over and over and over again. You don't think that when slavery was legal, that the majority of white folks who got a chance to vote in these kind of things thought that slavery was fine? I mean, every president, even Lincoln, wasn't really that much against slavery. I mean, I know people, oh, that's not true. He emancipated the slaves. No, he emancipated the slaves in the South. And there were plenty of presidents after Lincoln who still were not anti-slavery. So let's not pretend, that these fine white men were all altruistic when it comes to things like this. No, they were all white supremacists, and they still are white supremacists. The guy sitting there now is a white supremacist. He would still justify slavery and has. So we're half the white men in Congress and in the Senate. So let's not pretend that the United States, has solved their problems. They haven't. They covered them over a little bit. And when we push back on things like racism or this, we are the ones that are looked at like we're trying to do something absurd by the groups we're fighting. And they get hostile. I mean, like I said, threatening. I mean, physical threatening. I mean, it really is absurd where these people come from. And like I said, you can draw a direct line to the people who are the most, strident and strong and vicious defenders of native mascots and the political right. You can switch out a Redskin hat and a MAGA hat on most of those people. And in fact, if they had their way, they would have a hat that says MAGA on it too, and a Redskin logo on the front and "Make America Great" across the back. Because they're the same people, but they aren't the majority. They're just the vicious and the hateful minority, and vocal minority. But we're winning the battle. And look, we have some stuff inside internally that we do need to call out the frauds, and even the people who are really native people. We've got to put them in their place, and we have. Most of those people are very, very marginalized because they're basically siding with white people. Hell, when we were doing this thing up in Lancaster, all those white people in Lancaster, which are pretty much all the people of Lancaster, they flew in some native people. Well, one guy they claimed was native who wasn't. He's a fraud. And the other one, I don't know. I mean, his name was Milk, and he could have passed for Milk. I don't know. But I'm not saying, look, I'm not saying you got to judge somebody by the way they look, but they flew these two guys in, and they proudly brought them to me. I mean, this Brenda, whatever the hell her name is, I can't think of her name. That was one of the cheerleaders, right? she brings these two guys over and introduces me, and I didn't even stand up. I sat in my chair and I says, "You guys really ought to be ashamed of yourself." Most native people would never go into another native territory and side with the white people against them. So regardless of how you guys feel about this, the idea that you'll let the white people in this community use you when you see all the native people here, because this was at an event at Lancaster, a community engagement event, which was again one more nail in the coffin to them finally retiring the slur that they used. But I mean, these guys who get used in this way, for one thing, they're terribly unsuccessful. I mean, there's a few places that they put it to vote, and they've hung on to these native mascots. There are a few, but you know what? For the most part, by the time a board votes on it, those mascots are history, literally history. And if they hang on to it, it's just about hanging on to it till the next time. Because the trend is, especially amongst the students, because most of the vocal and violent, activists pushing to keep these mascots are not the students. In fact, many of the changes that have taken place at these schools were led by the students, including places like Cooperstown and other. I mean, look, the battle in Neshaminy in Langhorne, Pennsylvania, pitted the school newspaper, the student-produced school newspaper, against the school administration. Now, I'm not saying there weren't students that are in favor of keeping the Redskin name in Neshaminy, but the newspaper, the really socially conscious and I guess well-read or intelligent students, they said, no, we're not gonna use that word. We refuse to print it, and they were punished for it by the adults. So it's the adults who are trying to dictate to the students the use of these racist mascots. So next weekend, the Buffalo Bills will host the Washington football team. And here's the part that kind of saddens me. Because when they went to Minnesota, there were several hundred. I mean, you would think there would be thousands, but there were several hundred Native people, including some of the people who sit on council and in various places in Minnesota, who showed up to participate. In fact, one of the guys who sat on council was wearing a shirt similar to this, the Caucasian shirt. But no, but there several hundred showed up. It doesn't look like there's going to be much of a protest when Washington comes to Buffalo next weekend. And to me, it's a little frustrating. Look, I was at the park they call Columbus Park in Buffalo. And, there was a dozen or so of us that were there. Not very many Native people either. Me and, Aggie and Williams and a few others. But the Seneca Nation doesn't step up. I mean, Tuscaroras, the Tonawanders. Look, we have a decent population. And, and you can make these protests, if you want to call them that, or these demonstrations, social events. They aren't, look, nobody's going to get beat up. We're not vandalizing something. But again, we don't get the participation. I hate rallies and protests, but I go to them all. If I'm invited, or if I'm aware of it and I'm available, I try to go. I try to be supportive. But the reason I hate it is because, and I'm not criticizing the organization of these events, but, most of us aren't very active. Most Native people are not activists. So, when the few of us do show up someplace, don't get me wrong, we're supported. I mean, look, when I gave my interview to the media at that Columbus Park on Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day, that was one of the most widely shared posts that I put up, and I wasn't the only one posting it. And lots and lots of Native people supported what I said and the fact that we were there. They didn't show up themselves. So if you're going to judge whether something is wrong or right by how many people have to get up and in your face to tell you it's wrong, then you're looking for the wrong metric, because it only takes some common sense. It really only takes some common sense. If you're mocking a people who, and if you're representing them in a way that doesn't truly represent who we are, if you're running around, if you're a white person, man or woman, wearing a headdress, running around a football stadium, or if you're an opposing team who thinks you can impale a rubber head that looks like a Native person, like the Eagles fan, or hold a banner that says, "Get ready for another Trail of Tears," or if you're a sportscaster who thinks you can put something on the screen that says the Braves were scalped, I dare you to make a reference to Jews being gassed or black men being lynched. I dare you to do that, because that's the equivalent. That is the other ethnic equivalent. And this isn't about sensationalizing it. Our people were massacred. And guys like L. Frank Baum, a literary giant in America, American literature, suggested that we should be exterminated, annihilated, so they could use our images and they could sing the praises of how grand we were, the grand kings of the forest and the plain, as he put it. That in latter ages they could praise us and appropriate those images. But don't let us live as the miserable wretches that he claimed we were. The mangy, or what do you call it? Something, the mangy cur that licks the hand that smites them. I mean, look, he had such an ill opinion of Native people that he thought that our mere existence didn't do what he thought our history was justice, and that we were better off being dead, killed, so our images could stay alive. So white people eliminate us as people, kill the Indian, save the man, kill the Indian, so they could keep alive some, made up, some Disney version of who we were. That's not honoring, folks. It's insulting. It's offensive, and it's a mockery. So I don't expect a major demonstration at next week's football game. I know that some people, Michael Martin and some others, had made some phone calls. If there's something, maybe a few of us will make some noise. By the way, tomorrow I'm participating at an event at WBFO and WNED Studios that talks about some of this, really trying to make sure that the media does take into account, the diversity that lives in this area. And I've got some shame on WBFO to do when I go to this meeting. So but I was pleased to have been invited. But look, we've got work to do, and we are doing it. So again, my kudos and my praise to those, to the success that we've had on this front, and we'll continue, and eventually we'll get rid of all of them. I want to thank you for listening. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.